Sleep, something so ordinary and yet so mysterious, has always been the invisible foundation of human performance. Health and happiness. And yet, in the modern world, it is also the first sacrifice people make in the name of productivity, entertainment, or ambition. But what if I told you that every night you shave off an hour or two from your natural sleep cycle, you are quietly rewiring your brain in ways you cannot feel immediately, but will eventually pay for with memory lapses, emotional instability, lower focus, and even a shorter lifespan, because sleep deprivation is not just about feeling tired. It is a silent enemy eating away at your brain's very capacity to function, one missed hour at a time. Think about the last time you pulled an all-nighter. Maybe for work, maybe to cram for an exam, maybe just scrolling endlessly through your phone. At first you laughed it off, poured another cup of coffee, told yourself you'd push through, but when morning came, the brain fog was real. Your concentration slipped, small mistakes appeared in your work, and suddenly simple conversations felt harder to follow. Because what was happening inside was catastrophic. Your hippocampus, the structure in your brain responsible for memory formation, had been shut down like a computer forced into power-saving mode, and without enough sleep, the brain simply cannot store new memories. Which is why scientists have shown in experiments that sleep-deprived students perform almost 40% worse on memory tests compared to well-rested ones. But it doesn't stop there. Sleep is also the nightly cleaning crew of the brain. A process called the glymphatic system, which literally washes away the toxic buildup of proteins like beta, the same protein that clumps together in Alzheimer's disease. So when you sacrifice sleep, you are not just skipping rest. You are skipping brain maintenance, and the result is like never taking out the trash. The toxins pile up quietly until one day the stench is unbearable. But it's not just memory, it's mood. Because every night without enough sleep leaves your amygdala, the emotional center of your brain, hyperactive, like a smoke alarm that goes off at the slightest hint of trouble. Which is why sleep-deprived people feel more anxious, more irritable, more depressed, and even more impulsive. So the fights you have with your loved ones, the arguments at work, the decisions you regret late at night may not be signs of weakness in your character, but the predictable result of a brain stripped of its emotional balance by lack of sleep, and yet society glorifies this state. Celebrates those who brag about running on for hours of sleep, calls them hardworking, committed, even heroic, when in reality, they are slowly dismantling the very tool that makes them human, their brain. And the tragedy is that most people don't even recognize the depth of this damage because the brain has no pain receptors. It does not scream when you hurt it. It only shows subtle cracks, forgetting names, losing patience, craving sugar and caffeine. Zoning out during meetings, and you dismiss these as just stress or aging, but really they are the whispers of a brain starved of its most vital nutrient, sleep. Imagine a professional athlete who trains daily, eats well, and hydrates, but never allows their muscles to recover. They may look fine for a while, but eventually injury is inevitable. And in the same way, your brain is the athlete of your daily life, running endless marathons of decisions, conversations, and problem solving. But if you rob it of recovery each night, you are guaranteeing breakdown, only this breakdown shows up as dementia decades earlier. Depression that lingers, creativity that dies, and productivity that never reaches its peak. Now, let's not just speak in abstract science. Let me tell you a story. Picture a young medical student, hungry for success, burning the midnight oil, telling himself he can push through exams by studying until dawn, caffeine in one hand, textbooks in the other. For weeks he repeats this pattern, proud of his stamina. But when the exam comes, he finds himself reading the same question over and over, unable to recall what he studied. His memory betrayed him, his focus shattered, and he fails to realize it was not lack of intelligence but lack of sleep that sabotaged him. Because the brain is ruthless when deprived, it will lock away access to memory until it gets the rest it needs. And countless students, professionals, and dreamers have faced this same fate. Punished not for laziness, but for neglecting the most powerful study hack ever discovered at hours of sleep. Scientists have even compared sleep deprivation to alcohol intoxication, showing that after 20 hours awake, your reaction Time, focus, and judgment are equivalent to having a blood alcohol concentration of 0.1%. Legally drunk in most countries, so imagine how many people are showing up to work driving cars, making life or death decisions in hospitals or on the road, while essentially drunk on sleep deprivation, except unlike alcohol, this impairment carries no stigma. People brag about it, celebrate it, and only realize the danger when the consequences strike, sometimes in the form of a car accident, sometimes in the form of a misdiagnosis, sometimes in the slow erosion of their mental health. And if you think it's just about performance, consider this. Lack of sleep alters the very biology of your brain at the cellular level, shrinking synapses, reducing neurogenesis, cutting off the brain's ability to adapt and rewire, meaning every sleepless night is not just a lost day of productivity, but a day stolen from your future intelligence. Because sleep is when the brain cements learning, builds connections, and recharges creativity. So the idea is, you couldn't find the solutions that eluded you, the emotions you couldn't control were not a flaw in you, they were the price of stolen sleep. And what about the body? The brain is not alone in this war. Sleep deprivation also distorts your hormones, making you hungrier by boosting ghrelin, suppressing leptin, and dulling your sensitivity to insulin, pushing you towards weight gain and even diabetes. But here's the cruel twist. The brain, in its sleep-deprived state, craves quick energy, so you reach for sugar, caffeine, and junk food, which give you momentary relief but further destabilize your system, locking you in a vicious cycle of exhaustion and poor choices, and the brain, already running on fumes, now suffers from nutritional chaos, amplifying the damage. Even your immune system takes a hit, as sleep is when your body deploys natural killer cells. The elite soldiers that fight viruses and even destroy budding cancer cells. But when you lose sleep, their activity drops by up to 70%, leaving you vulnerable, unprotected, and weaker in the face of disease. Which is why studies show that people who sleep less than 6 hours a night are 3 times more likely to catch a cold when exposed to the virus compared to those who sleep 8. And the long-term risks are even darker, linking sleep deprivation to higher rates of stroke, heart attack, and yes, Alzheimer's disease. Yet despite all this evidence, society still treats sleep as negotiable, optional, or even indulgent. When in truth, it is the most natural medicine, the ultimate brain enhancer, and the cheapest therapy you will ever have access to. Because every night, without pills or supplements, you can give your brain exactly what it craves. The chance to reset, recharge, and repair. And perhaps the most unsettling part of this story is that many of the dangers of sleep deprivation are invisible until it is too late because you don't notice. The way your brain is eroding day by day, you just adapt, you normalize the fatigue. You tell yourself you're fine because everyone else around you is also tired. Walking around half awake, surviving on stimulants, but deep down your neurons are screaming. Networks that should be firing in harmony are sputtering like dying light bulbs. And creativity that should be flowing like a river becomes a trickle. And slowly you start to confuse this with your new normal. You stop realizing what it feels like to be fully awake, fully sharp, fully alive, and that is perhaps the cruelest trick of all. Because when scientists have asked sleep-deprived participants to rate their performance, they consistently believe they are doing fine, yet objective tests show massive declines, meaning the very brain that is impaired is also unable to recognize its own impairment. So millions of people are walking through life unaware that they are functioning at half capacity, making worse decisions, learning less, aging faster, and sabotaging their futures without realizing it. And the modern world doesn't help, because it is engineered against sleep, with endless screens emitting blue light that tricks your brain into thinking it's still daytime. Endless deadlines that reward those who burn the midnight oil. Endless entertainment available at the swipe of a finger. Until suddenly you look up and realize it's 2 a.m. Your alarm is set for 6, and you've once again cheated yourself of the very fuel your brain needs to protect you. Now imagine this cycle playing out, not just in one person, but across entire societies. Populations of sleep-deprived people driving cars, raising children, making financial decisions, governing nations. And it starts to make sense why we see rising levels of anxiety, depression, burnout, accidents, and chronic disease. Because the hidden enemy is not just stress or diet or technology, but the slow erosion of sleep. And in this sense, sleep deprivation becomes a public health crisis, a silent epidemic that costs economies billions in lost productivity costs. Families, years of joy stolen by illness and cost individuals their very sense of self as their minds unravel. And yet, there is a deeper irony here, because people often deprive themselves of sleep in order to get ahead, to achieve more, to be more productive. But in reality, every study shows the opposite, that those who prioritize sleep outperform, outlast, and outthink those who sacrifice it. Because a rested brain can learn twice as fast, remember twice as well, and create solutions that a tired brain cannot even imagine. So, the entrepreneurs, the students, the parents, the leaders who believe they are gaining an edge by skipping sleep are in fact bluntly cutting away their sharpest edge. And this is where the story becomes almost tragic. Because generation after generation repeats the same mistake. Treating sleep like a weakness instead of the hidden superpower it truly is. And if you still doubt its power, consider the simple experiment of dreaming, because every night when you dream, your brain is performing its most creative act, blending memories, emotions, and ideas into new patterns. And these patterns often hold the seeds of breakthroughs. History is filled with examples. From scientists to musicians to inventors who woke up with solutions or melodies that had eluded them while awake. And yet in our arrogance, we dismiss dreams as random or meaningless, when in fact they are proof that sleep is not wasted time, but the most fertile soil for ideas. And by cutting short our sleep, we are robbing ourselves of the very dreams that could change our lives. But the brain is not infinitely forgiving. And every year of chronic sleep loss compounds the damage. Neurons become less resilient. Brain volume literally shrinks in key regions. And what began as a few late nights in your 20s becomes cognitive decline in your 40s, memory lapses in your 50s, and possibly dementia in your 60s. And the saddest part is that many of these outcomes could be prevented with something as simple, as natural, as accessible as honoring sleep. Because unlike expensive treatments or rare supplements, sleep costs nothing. It is already wired into our biology, waiting every night to restore us. If only we would let it. But let's pause here and reflect through another story. Picture an executive, successful on the outside, running a company, admired by peers, but inside he is crumbling because his days stretch to 15 hours, his nights shrink to 4. And slowly, he begins to notice he is more irritable, less patient, struggling to remember key details in meetings, needing stronger doses of caffeine to stay functional, and he tells himself, it's just stress, just the price of success. But what he doesn't realize is that his brain is being hollowed out from within. And one morning, during a crucial presentation, he blanks. Completely forgets a sequence of numbers he had repeated 100 times before, and the room goes silent. And in that silence, he feels the weight of something he cannot name. But science can. Sleep deprivation, and this moment becomes his wake-up call. Because later, when he finally allows himself to rest for a full week, sleeping 8 hours each night, he feels something he hasn't felt in years: clarity, energy, joy. And he realizes success built on sleeplessness is a house built on sand, destined to collapse, while success built on rest is a fortress. And this story repeats everywhere, in every home, in every profession, in every culture. Because no matter who you are or where you live, the laws of sleep do not bend. They do not care about your deadlines, your ambitions, or your distractions. The brain demands its rest, and when denied, it punishes quietly but relentlessly. And if you need more evidence, think of how sleep deprivation is used as torture. Prisoners kept awake until their minds unravel. Hallucinations take over. Paranoia sets in, and identity itself crumbles. This is not science fiction. This is documented history. And yet millions of people voluntarily inflict a milder version of this torture on themselves every night. Scrolling, working, binge, thinking they are in control, when in fact they are playing with one of the most delicate balances of the human brain. And every time they cross the line, they pay in ways too subtle to notice until it is too late. But here's where hope enters the story, because unlike many health problems that require complex interventions, the path to restoring sleep is often simple. It begins with respect, respecting the night as sacred, respecting the brain's ancient rhythms, creating an environment where darkness signals rest, where screens are put away, where routines are honored, and where the body is allowed to follow the natural dance. It evolved over millennia. Because your ancestors did not need alarms to wake, they lived by the sun and stars, and their brains thrived. And while we cannot return fully to that simplicity, we can reclaim pieces of it by dimming lights, by calming the mind before bed, by treating sleep not as a chore, but as the ultimate gift to our future selves. And imagine, just imagine, what the world would look like if people truly did this. If children grew up in households where sleep was honored instead of cut short, if workplaces celebrated rest as much as hustle, if leaders prioritized their clarity over their exhaustion, the ripple effects would transform everything from education to healthcare to creativity. Because rested brains are kinder, sharper, and more resilient, and sleep is not selfish. It is service to everyone you interact with. Because the version of you that is rested is a version that listens, that cares, that creates, that leads, and that loves more deeply. So the next time you are tempted to stay up late for one more task, one more episode, one more scroll, remember this truth. You are not stealing from your sleep. You are stealing from your brain, your body, and your future. And yet, despite everything we know, despite centuries of observation and decades of neuroscience, people still treat sleep as optional, a luxury for the weak, and this cultural myth may be the most dangerous of all. Because it has wormed its way into our values, glorifying those who stay up late grinding, those who boast about needing only 4 hours of rest, those who wear exhaustion like a badge of honor, as though self-destruction were the same as discipline. But in truth, it is not strength to ignore biology. It is blindness. And the cost of that blindness becomes clearer with every new study that links poor sleep to heart disease, stroke, obesity, diabetes, depression, and even cancer. Because when you strip away rest, you strip away the immune system's defenses. You strip away the hormones that regulate appetite and metabolism. You strip away the cellular repairs that prevent mutations. And what begins as a few yawns in a meeting can end decades later as chronic disease that could have been prevented by simply closing your eyes. And in this sense, sleep is like an invisible insurance policy, quietly renewing your body every night, paying dividends in longevity and vitality. But only if you pay into it consistently. Only if you give it the hours it requires. And those hours are not negotiable. You cannot hack them. You cannot cheat them. Because while you may push through for a night or two, the debt always comes due. And the interest compounds with every lost hour until your brain begins to betray you, your body begins to break down, and your spirit begins to dull. And still, so many ask, how much sleep do I really need? As if the answer were not already written into our DNA. As if we were the exception to millions of years of evolution. But the truth is clear. For almost all adults, the sweet spot is 7 to 9 hours, no less, and the rare genetic outliers who can thrive on less are so vanishingly rare that you are more likely to be struck by lightning than to be one of them. So if you find yourself excusing your 5 or 6 hours is enough, know that your brain is not convinced. Know that your cells are quietly paying the price. Know that your future self is silently pleading with you to change. And perhaps the most powerful way to understand this is to look at memory itself, because when you sleep, particularly during deep slow-wave sleep, your brain takes the raw data of the data, conversations, the facts, the skills you practiced and literally replays them, strengthening connections, weaving them into long-term storage. So that when you wake up, you do not just remember, you understand more deeply. And when you cut short your sleep, you are essentially throwing away half of your learning, tossing aside hours of study or work, because your brain never had the chance to cement them. And this is why students who pull all-nighters often perform worse. Why professionals who work until dawn often make sloppy mistakes. Because they are sabotaging the very mechanism that should have locked in their knowledge. And then there is emotional memory, the subtle but powerful effect of REM sleep, where the brain processes feelings, smooths away sharp edges of fear and grief, helps you recover from social pain, and restores emotional balance. And when you miss out on this, you become not just tired but fragile, more irritable, more reactive, more prone to anger or despair, which explains why sleep deprivation is such a strong predictor of depression and anxiety. And why people in crisis often spiral downward fastest when they cannot rest. Because sleep is not just rest for the body, but therapy for the soul. The nightly counselor that listens without words, heals without judgment, and restores without effort. And here the story takes another turn, because if sleep is such a healer, then what does it mean to a society that is losing it? What does it mean to children who grow up sleep-deprived from early school start times, to parents who are stretched thin by late work hours? Two communities lit up all night by artificial light. Two nations where economic pressures push people to sacrifice their nights. It means we are raising generations less resilient, less creative, less empathetic, and less healthy. And the tragedy is that it does not have to be this way, because solutions exist. Simple ones, powerful ones, like delaying school start times to match teenage biology, like redesigning cities with darker nights to allow circadian rhythms to reset, like reshaping workplaces to value results over endless hours. And yet change is slow, because culture resists, myths resist, and people resist, clinging to the illusion that they can outsmart evil. But let me tell you this, no one, not the most disciplined athlete, not the most brilliant scientist, not the wealthiest entrepreneur, has ever truly defeated sleep. Those who tried eventually broke, because the need for rest is woven into the very code of life itself. From tiny fruit flies to great whales, from newborns to elders, every living thing depends on cycles of rest and restoration, and to deny this is to deny life itself. And so, perhaps, the true measure of wisdom in our time is not how much we can do on less sleep, but how courageously we can reclaim it, how boldly we can protect it from the encroaching demands of modernity, how seriously we can take the whispers of fatigue before they become the screams of illness, because the heroes of the future will not be those who burned themselves out, but those who lasted, who thrived, who brought their best selves day after day, because they chose to rest when the world told them not to. And if you need inspiration, look not at the martyrs of sleeplessness, but at those who balance, those who honor the quiet hours, those who wake refreshed and pour their full energy into their work and families, those who age gracefully with minds still sharp, bodies still strong, spirits still joyful. Because that is the reward of honoring sleep, not just survival, but flourishing. So, when you lay down tonight, remember you are not wasting time. You are investing. You are planting seeds of clarity, resilience, memory, and health. You are giving your brain permission to clean itself, your heart permission to recover, your immune system permission to strengthen, and your soul permission to heal. And in that moment, you are resisting the great lie of our age. The lie that busyness is worth more than well-being. The lie that exhaustion is a status symbol. The lie that sleep can wait for later. Because the truth is simple. Sleep cannot wait, your brain cannot wait, your life cannot wait, and the sooner you embrace this, the sooner you will discover that the hidden enemy of your brain was never really sleep deprivation itself, but no,